Thank you, Sue. That's great. I think what you've said about the vacancy rates is really, really troubling, isn't it? So this is just a quick cook's tour, really. Obviously, it's a sensitive subject, so there are some sort of resource and things at the end, and also in the forum website. I'll just move on. So, as an introduction, really, the previous article that I wrote for the forum was addressing burnout and what can be learned really from other professions. And look, what came through from that for me was how far ahead the GPs are. So there's a very good group. It's called the Workwell Doctors, and they've got fantastic rules on the website around grief, dealing with grief, that sort of thing, nutrition, all sorts of really helpful things. And also, I think a significant positive thing that I found was neonatal nurses who had a sort of hub psychologist in their department, and it was not only good for the women and families, but also for the staff, and it improved it improved retention of the staff nurses, particularly. But for today, the focus is on well-being more generally, what we can learn from different cultures. And so I've taken for the example for today, Japan. And one of the reasons for that is I was really lucky to go on a fantastic study tour, midwifery study tour in 2023. And what Denise and I were discussing this yesterday, that really Japan has seen a significant growth of corporate wellness initiatives in the workplace and a really positive approach to well-being and work. So that's the reason for that. The baby in the photo was this beautiful second day born, and it was at a birth house that we were lucky to visit on the outskirts of Tokyo. So that was wonderful. And you can see the hands of both the parents there. So it's a really lovely photo. So just a bit of a backstory, really, for the impetus for all this. It came from just an article, Guardian article called The Coming Storm, that a journalist wrote. And effectively, it was taking texts from very burnt out and sort of intensive care consultants and frontline staff in the middle of the pandemic were writing in these texts to this helpline called Shout. And they were analysed by psychologists who could actually see very clearly that there was, moral injury, total burnout, moral distress, and all these things from bearing witness, but also PTSD type 2. So that led me, it was a very powerful piece, and it made me want to sort of, I don't know, help do something positive. So I contacted two occupational psychologists who just started at the university, and they were extremely open to doing some work on this. And we recognized that really burnout was a real, not burnout, sorry, debriefing was a real problem. It was not happening, and these staff were going home, without being thanked or without being properly spoken to, and yeah, just asked how they were. So we then did a presentation at a psychology conference on voice and silence, hence the photo, the picture. And we got a team together of really good academics who wanted to be involved in this subject on debriefing, and published a systematic literature review as a team. And then I led a cross-faculty research cafe on resilience, and then from that, really, I suppose, I became interested in burnout in midwifery and the maternity services. One thing that's, I think, quite interesting that I've just updated, just done an extra literature search on this, is that and there's a group of anaesthetists, and they've devised an app for debriefing, which I think could be really exciting and usable. We could adapt it possibly in maternity care. This picture is actually, it's taken from an Oculus Rift headset for virtual reality. And so it's a picture of a tea ceremony room. And the image relates for me to, work spaces and really how unfit for purpose our clinical spaces actually are. And when I went back to practice just for a couple of years, just before the pandemic, there were, by the end of the 2 years, we had no office. There were 6 of us specialist midwives. We lost our office, and there were only 4 big desks in there. But, I ended up in a cupboard with no window. And there was no changing room. There was no rest room for staff. There was nowhere for counselling, or the most important thing for me was handovers. Where do you do, it's such an important activity. So it just shows, doesn't it? But we just tolerated it. But in fact, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable working conditions or culture, I would say. And this is about using technology, but it's a really brilliant experience to go in and use this virtuality. It could be used for stress reduction, actually. So I've said that Japan's got this sort of movement really towards improving the workspaces, and employee health really is prioritized with actual work-life balance taken and put into policies. And for example, they have 8-hour days maximum, 40-hour weeks maximum, and really flexible working is just normalized. Pilates at work classes, and some places give a nutritious breakfast. There's quite family friendly policies, and Denise has visited very often, so she knows more than I do. But for them in Japan, a healthy workforce means more productive and therefore more competitive as a business. I think they have some places have stress check programs and screening to combat burnout and stress at work. So the next slide is really about Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion. So she's written a paper. I was dying to find some data, but it is a little bit biased because it's she's analysing her own sort of program really, but it's called Theory, Method, Research and Intervention. And there's a 26 point sort of questionnaire, and I really sort of advise people to, some of you probably already have, but you get an immediate kind of result. So the 3 themes: self-kindness, common humanity and mindfulness, and then there are some sub-themes. So what Kristen Neff suggests is that self-compassion refers to being supportive towards oneself when experiencing suffering or pain. And she also suggests that it can be acquired and practiced, which we know, but her work does actually really support all of this. However, it is all self-reporting. And what she's also found through analysing the data from this is that greater self-compassion is actually linked to reduced psychopathology, obviously things like depression, and it's more positive for well-being and increased self-esteem or sort of self-worth. So it is useful to do the test, I think. This is about trauma stewardship, which I hadn't really heard this term before. So Lipsky and Burke have written a book that really describes it well. And so they describe it as a daily practice, really about having much more self-awareness and caring for ourselves while we're caring for others. And the cartoon I couldn't really resist because it's not that clear, I'm afraid, but it's a pilot who's obviously got home from a flight and just having a cup of tea and chatting to his partner. And in the end, she just says, "Must you precede everything you say with 'this is your captain speaking'?" And the reason I've included it is because through the trauma stewardship book, there's a cycle that, you know, when you've been exposed to trauma in the workplace, that you often go through. And so one of the stages is like grandiosity. So you think everyone's relying on me, I can't possibly leave, I'm a very important person in this business, in this workplace. And I think the other couple of things it shows to me is that, you know, there's a work-life balance, and it's very hard to you know, it's very blurred, isn't it, often, and how important it is to have someone to listen to when you are, and you know, to give you a little bit of feedback. So anyway, the other thing I want to mention is that Kate Greenstock and Sally Pizarro have written, they're both senior midwives, and they've both written really good books. I'm just looking at the time, better flip through. This is about the retreats. This is the space that I've got set up. I am actually trying to seek funding because I don't believe midwives should have to pay. You've been burnt out from, you know, and exhausted from NHS work. And so I'm trying to get it so the days can be free or just pay minimum. And then you can contact me in the link below. And there's just then really, in conclusion, you know, we can see that Japan's investment in the workplace wellbeing programs is really, really gaining impetus. However, in the NHS, you know, I think we really do need urgent campaigns, improving the workspaces, develop evidence-based wellness initiatives, and prevent frontline maternity staff from experiencing stress, moral injury, and burnout, and really to ultimately improve outcomes and maternity care experiences for women, birthing people, and their families. And that's some references there.